Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is our Humanistic Management Professionals Lunch and Learn, hosted by the International Humanistic Management Association. We are an association of individuals who are concerned with and want to promote better management through humanistic ideals applied into management. Anyone's able to volunteer. It's a collaboratively run organization, and we welcome any help you might have. Today, we have our guest. Well, first, let me introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Hancock. I'm the founder of Humanist Learning Systems. I'm the continuing education partner for this program. My co-host is Elizabeth Castillo. Please introduce yourself.
Hey, everyone. I'm Elizabeth. I'm out in Tempe, Arizona at Arizona State University. Welcome.
And our guest today is Sherri Sutton. She's a new author who's waiting for her first book to be published. It's called The Earn Method. She believes so strongly about the principles and foundations of appreciative inquiry that she uses it in every aspect of her life. Sherri is certified as an appreciative inquiry practitioner and an appreciative inquiry facilitator. She is currently working on bringing appreciative inquiry to the city of Tampa, and she plans to have an 800-person summit. I didn't realize it was going to be that big, on November 4th, 5th, and 6th. Welcome, Sherri.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. And I received some really great questions from the people on the call. And so I think what I want to do first is just talk a little bit about appreciative inquiry. I think people have been exposed to it in different ways. So there's the principles of appreciative inquiry, and there's also the 4D method framework that you can use, which some people use 5D or 6D, and we'll talk about how we get those extra Ds in there. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint here and see if you can see it. So is it working? Yes? Okay, I'm getting the nod. So we're going to talk about using appreciative inquiry to create positive and profitable change. So I'm going to focus on how I use it in business. But I want to let you know that really for appreciative inquiry, you use it from yourself out, right? So it's a tool that you can just use personally in your own life. And you can also use it in your business. As we said, we're going to use it in the community for the city of Tampa and for any whole system. So it's a whole system change methodology that you can use, but really what appreciative inquiry is at the core is it's asking positive questions. And so it really, the two words appreciative inquiry are asking a question in a positive way. And so David Cooperrider is known for saying words create worlds. And so how we ask questions and just the act of asking a question creates change. And so the foundational principles of appreciative inquiry, there's 5 of them. The first one is the constructionist principle, which is the words create worlds, right? So what we say really creates the world around us. The poetic principle is what we focus on grows. Right, so where we put our focus, that's what's going to grow around us. The simultaneity principle, which is just really fun to say, is that sense of wonder, right? We live in the world that our questions create. The anticipatory principle is where we're creating that vision of a positive future, and then the positive future is focusing on our strengths and what's working. And so the greatest way I can really share with you how I've incorporated this in my life is I learned about it, and in the course we were in the workshop, they talked about a pharmacist who used it. And what the pharmacist said is he took this back to his business. And when he was in the pharmacy, when the patient came in to pick up their medication, he used to say to the patient, "Call me on Thursday and let me know how you're feeling." And the patients would call back and they were, okay. So when we really started talking about words creating worlds and what we focus on grows, he said, I'm going to shift my question. And so he started asking the patients, call me on Thursday and tell me how much better you're feeling. And he said that's the only thing he changed. They were on the same drugs. They were picking them up at the same time. Nothing changed in the equation except his question. But his patients felt 30 to 40% better when they called back because they started looking for ways in which they felt better. So I said, I'm going to try this at home. I have 2 teenagers. At the time they were in middle school, so they were preteens. And so I'm going to see if this really works. So when my children came home from school, I started asking them. Had always asked them, right? They would come home and I'd say, hi, how was your day? And I'd get a lot of grunts. And so I said, I'm going to change my question and see if it works. And so when they came home from school, I would say, hi, tell me the best thing that happened today. And I thought I was being really clever. And at first what I got was them rolling their eyes, please don't bring that work stuff home and use it on us, whatever. And so I'm like, no, I really want you to answer. So what's the best thing that happened at school today? And so they would say like lunch, I got out, the bell rang, right? But I kept asking the question and it didn't take long. It was like a week and a half maybe of asking the question every day. And what they realized was when they got home from school, I was going to ask them that question. And as a result, they started noticing good things that were happening to them throughout the day. And so what I found is they would come home with like one thing and they would say like this happened. And then after another week, there were multiple things. And so what would happen during their day is when something good happened, they'd say, oh, I'm going to store that, right? She's going to ask me the best thing that happened. This might be it. And then something else would happen. They'd say, no, this might be it. And so they really started noticing good things that were happening throughout the day. And it changed our conversation. It changed what we talked about at dinner. It changed what we focused on. And it changed really looking at the strengths that were there. So once that happened, I was completely sold on the process and really saw the benefit of using it. And since I've been in learning and development for my entire career, I wanted to start using it in the workplace. So I wanted to share with you choices and attitudes really have a very significant impact, right, on your happiness, on your emotions, how you respond. And so when you look at it overall, you say people have, I put here, improved health, well-being, longevity, greater quality of life. They're happier, right? Happier people really bring out the best of who they are. So when you're looking at a workplace or how you use these principles to really help and aid your business, it's really looking at people spend more than 50% of their time at work, right? So if I'm happier and I'm engaged and I'm looking for the best things that happen each day, they have fewer sick days, higher productivity, better performance, discretionary effort. So when we talk about discretionary effort, that's really the difference between what I need to do to be successful. I always say what I need to do to get the A, right? So when kids are in school, you learn, what do I have to do to get the A? But very, very, very few children come home and say, I already have an A in this class, but I'm going to do extra work to learn more, right? But they have the capacity to learn more if they want to, and that's their discretionary effort. So at work, people usually work on average to about 60% of their capacity. So they're able to do a lot more, but they either don't know like what they're able to do and how they'll be recognized for doing it, or they're not motivated to do more. But when we start looking at tapping into what's right and what you can do and using some of the principles of appreciative inquiry, then we start tapping into that discretionary effort and people become more creative and engaged. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've done that in the business place and how we've used the 4, 5, or 6D process in doing that. But it really is about the foundational principles of asking positive questions and looking for positive outcomes. And one of the best positive questions that I use in the workplace is, what's the best thing that could possibly happen? Right? What's the best possible outcome that you're looking for? And really have people start looking for what the best outcome is. So I want to talk for a minute just about this 4D process, because a lot of people know about the 4D process. They had questions about whether it's 4Ds or 5Ds and what that really means. And so it just depends on whose research you're looking at and what you're using the framework for. David Cooperrider co-developed this theory in 1986. And when he did, it was the 4D process, which is discover, dream, design, and deliver. And that's been called a couple different things. You might see it as discover, dream, design, and destiny, or discover, dream, design, and deploy. Whatever you choose to use. People change the words because when they were using it in business, when they came in with words like destiny, then a lot of CEOs were like, that sounds too fluffy, right, for our environment. We're looking for something that's really going to have strategy and make positive change. So we tried to change the words around a little bit in using it as consultants so that it would sound like it belonged in business. But how the process works is some people have added the first D of define. And so you need define if you don't already know why you're using this methodology. So if you don't have a reason for change, and what appreciative inquiry does is it allows you to take whole systems and move them through change together. So what it says is you're going to define what that change is. If you don't know, you need to find out what it is that you're looking to change or what you want to do. And then you're going to discover the best of what is in the current system. What's working? What do people like about it? What strengths do they have? What are their high point moments? When do they feel the most alive in the current system? And once you have that, then you can go to the second phase, which is dream, and you can dream about possible outcomes. You can dream about what's possible, what you would want to do, and how you would want to make that work. And then you start to design what the solutions are in that process from dreaming. So if I dream that it could be this, I start designing the process to get there, and then I deliver it through an action plan. So that sounds great, right? And then the actual 6D that's been added is drumming. So I put the drum there. And drum just stands for celebration, right? Once you create this action plan and you bring it forward to celebrate the work that you've done. So one of the things about appreciative inquiry that's really been a little bit difficult is explaining it to people. And the reason is because it's experiential. So we say to people, if you just like experience the process, then you fully understand. But we can't allow people to experience the process always, because a lot of times we need to talk about it or sell it or convince people that it's something that they want to do. And so the best way to learn about it, if you're not experiencing it, I believe, is through stories. So I have 4 brief stories that I want to tell you. I chose these stories based on the questions that I saw that people were asking. And but based on your questions after we go through these stories, I'll be happy to talk more about it. But I'm hoping that sharing these 4 will give you some insight. Jennifer, do you want to talk?
Yeah, just real quick. We're at about 12, 13 minutes right now. So we do want to get to questions. So maybe one of the stories, and then let's move and open it up to the questions. I don't want to cut you short, but at the same time.
Okay, that's fine. Yep, totally fine. So I'll tell you the quickest story is for the Omni Hotel. And when David Cooperrider was learning about appreciative inquiry, he went to the Cleveland Medical Center, and they had the Omni Hotel was where guests were going to stay. And so they said, okay, if guests are going to stay in the Omni Hotel, then we need to make it better. It's not working well. And they were thinking they were going to need to fire the management and rehire them. And so what David did when he showed up is said, who's doing it right? Like, what hotel in town is doing what you want to do? And so they gave him a name of a hotel, and he said, great, let's all get on a bus and go there and see what they're doing right. And so when he took him to the hotel, the employees viewed what they were doing right, and they were able to come right back to their hotel and create the action plan for what they wanted to do. So it's really about creating that vision of what I want, what's going well, and how are you doing it right, and bringing that together. How's that for a quick story?
I think that's really good, actually. When I was looking at the 4Ds, I was thinking, gosh, when I teach what I call reality-based decision making, right? The process is define your problem. So you're working on the real problem that you want to solve and not a proxy problem that you think will solve your real problem. But the second step, which people don't do, is define what a good outcome is. Like,
Right.
what is it that you would really like to see happen? Because if you don't have a way to judge what a good outcome is, I don't even know how you get to the design phase, right? Like, you could.
And so that's part of what success looks like. But what appreciative inquiry adds to that is, what are you doing well right now? So even if you have a problem, right, you say this isn't working. Well, what part of it is working? Right? So someone might say, like, I'm not getting the sales that I need. Well, what are you doing well? Right? Because you're still doing pieces of that well. And so when you look for the strengths, then you build on the strengths that you already have to get better. And so it's about not only the solution that you want, but taking the strengths that you have to connect to the solutions. And that's really a main key component that's different. And so one of the questions people often have is, are you ignoring the problem then? And the answer is no, we don't ignore the problem, we focus on the solution. And so in designing the solution, the problems are going to take care of themselves because we're going to design a solution that works. And so we do address anything that's not working in the solution, but we just do it from a strength-based approach to say, what is working? How do we do more of that? And how do we make sure we're getting to this end result, which takes care of anything that isn't working in the process. And we do say, like, this isn't working. It's not that people put on blinders and say, I'm not going to talk about anything negative, but they just really, you really put your emphasis and focus on what you want and how to get that. And so you don't put your emphasis and focus on the problems. You say, I'm going to do that differently. This is what we need to do instead, and then focus your energy there.
All right. And people are wanting one more example. So if you could provide us one of the other examples.
So one of my favorite examples, and I'll tell it quickly, is the world religious leaders. And David Cooperrider tells a great story about this, but the Dalai Lama called him and said, I want to do a summit using the 4D process with the world religious leaders, because I believe we have more in common than we have differences. And so when David showed up, they were all there in the meeting space, and he said nobody was talking, nobody was interacting, everybody stayed to their own. They were really not willing to communicate. And so when they did the summit process of the 4Ds, the first is discover. And so they were discovering the best of what is. And so you do one-on-one interviews. And it's really hard not to like somebody when you hear their story, right? Because you're telling the story of the best of who you are. These are my best experiences. And once they did the discover process and really understood the strengths and the great things that everybody was doing, they came back together, and there was chatter and there was communication, and they really realized that they did have a lot more in common than they realized. And so they were able to design a plan to get together. They dreamed of, like, having summits, getting together, discussing the different religious views that they had, and really coming together to support each other instead of being at odds with each other. And they've done multiple summits since then. They created a plan for how they would do that, how they could communicate, how they would better understand each other. So it's just about that human connection. It starts in that discovery phase with the human connection, and it builds. In organizations, we do the same thing. We bring everyone together, the whole system, and we say, okay, I'm going to bring in my entire organization, from the person who answers the phone at the front desk to the vendors that deliver supplies to the CEO, and I'm going to talk about what's possible. What do we want to be? So it might be my vision for the future, and then I'm going to ask everybody how they can contribute to that vision. And then they're all going to be part of the plan, and then we move forward to execute it together. And when people co-create the plan, then they're part of the process. And so you don't have to sell them the plan, they're in it. And so they bring it together in that way. And it's been used all over the world. The Navy's used it, the United Nations has used it. We used it at George Washington University, and they used it for their wellness community that they established. And they said when they used it, the first thing that surprised people is that they included the students, right? We're going to create this program. We want to talk to the students and the parents of the students and the people in the community. So it's about bringing the whole system together in this discovery process and having them design the best possible outcome.
Very cool. Okay, so if we can stop sharing the screen so that we can get your full beautiful face. And if anybody has questions, please ask them in the chat room. And, we'll go from there. One of the questions we had was, and I think you've just answered it, does it work across cultures? And I'm guessing if you brought the world religious leaders together, that the answer is yes.
It does. And actually, when we get together as an AI community, there's a lot of different cultures that come together. We just did the World Positive Education Accelerator in Dallas, and we had many, many different countries come together and talk about the importance of education and how to use appreciative inquiry and have this positive education that we brought forward. And there were some great groups from Singapore, and they're doing a lot of work there. We had some groups coming from Dubai. So it definitely works cross-culturally because there's strengths in every system, right? And so it's really about the strengths in the human systems and moving forward.
So one of the questions I had for you, and I know we're getting a couple of questions in the chat room, so please do ask them there. We're going to get to them in just a little second, is how does this relate to using the Socratic method to help people find answers to questions that they probably already know, but there's different ways to use the Socratic method. Is this similar to that, or is it tangential to it, or completely different from that?
Well, it's really just the question piece. So however you're using, your questions to ask them, it's just making your questions conditionally positive. And so when you really think about the art of asking a question, are you looking for the best possible outcome? Are you looking for what's the best? So you're going to change your questions, just like how was your day, to what's the best thing that happened today, in the process of using it. But it's really just the actual, we say it's generative, right? So we're just changing the framework of the way we ask the question so that it'll be conditionally positive.
So how does an individual learn this skill for themselves and then, take it into it? Obviously they'd be taking it into the workplace because we spend so much time there, but I assume this is something you start with for yourself and learn for yourself and practice for yourself and then also use in the workplace. So how does one start?
Yes.
So how does one start?
So I didn't send you this resource, but I will. Jackie Kelm did a book, The Art of Appreciative Living, and she talks a lot about that. But really, if you just wanted to start for yourself, you just start by asking appreciative questions. And a great question to ask other people is, what's the best thing that happened to you today? And a great question if somebody's complaining about something, I see someone put something in the PhD process. They actually were talking about that at a dinner I had last night. They were complaining about the process. And so I said to them, well, what's the best thing that's happening in the process? What's the most important thing that you've learned? How have you grown the most in the process? So really just starting to create your questions to ask what the positive things are, what the strengths are, what you're learning, what you're growing, and putting the focus and the energy there, because it's just really about where you're putting your energy. So you're either putting your energy in what's working and asking questions around what's positive, or you're putting your energy around, this is awful and I hate it. And so then people collectively kind of gather around that.
So if I can see how I can use this myself, obviously, and I do use these things with my son to help him focus on positive things. But you take it into the workplace and you start asking people questions, and just like your kids going, I can imagine a workplace going, no. So how do we help ourselves change the culture of an organization while dealing with the negativity that is sometimes in our organizations that might not look too happily on someone trying to accentuate the positive?
So I don't want to be unrealistic and say that you can really ask people positive questions and everybody is going to, adapt to that. There are people that would take a very long time because they have to want to do it. But for the most part, in the people that I've worked with in the workplace, it has to do with what are the values of the organization? So does the organization value either positivity? Do they value teamwork? Do they value creativity? So what are the core values of the organization? And really working within the structure of those values. And so if you have a value of teamwork, then it's really something that you can help employees understand how to do it, but you also need to help them identify what the strengths are. So there's a lot of tools that you can use, right, where you can start identifying strengths, you can start posting people's strengths, you can look at the different strengths that your employees have in the organization and focus your energy there. And so your management has to be bought in to the process of focusing on what their employees are doing right, giving them positive feedback for doing things right, and then using this generative process of asking questions. And that is the biggest challenge that I have using appreciative inquiry in workplaces as a consultant. Is it's really, when I have the meeting with the CEO, I need to ask them, what are your values and what positive changes are you willing to make for your employees? Because if the answer is none, or they don't really value teamwork, they don't really value creativity, they don't really value having the voice, then they're not really going to be bought into the process. And we have talked to CEOs before about using the 4D process for their change initiatives. And I always tell them, if you are not going to listen to the responses from your team, if you're not really going to listen, because it's about everybody having a voice. And so even if everybody can't be part of the process, we'll go out and interview them to bring their voice into the room, right? We'll bring a quote that they used or something that they said or their beliefs, but it's about every voice being heard. And if you're not really willing to respond or make decisions based on all of the voices, then this isn't the right process for you, because it'll make things worse, right? Then your employees will know that you heard me, but you didn't respond. And so for us to use it personally, it's really just looking for what's possible, looking for the best in somebody. When you're talking to somebody and they say something and it rubs you the wrong way, or you're like, to be able to respond and say to yourself, oh, I wonder what we have in common, right? I wonder what their strengths are. And to be able to reframe that to look for what's positive. And that's really what it's about. It's reframing your questions and reframing problems into what's possible.
And I just got to say, I love that, because the idea of looking at someone that you might have conflict with and then reframing them as fully human, i.e. someone you have something in common with, to me,
Right.
That's the essence of my practice as a humanist, right? Is to remind myself of the full humanity of people I'm interacting with, so that I can reframe my thoughts into a more positive and productive way. Elizabeth, I think we have a couple of questions in the chat room, so let's open up to that.
Okay, great. Well, we'll start with a little case study here from Sunitha. It says, in the PhD process, most of the students have a basic grouse with their PhD guides, whom keep making negative, cynical comments about the process, and supervisors regarding the lack of support. What kind of AI questions can they ask themselves to see something positive, even when they feel they are not being helped or guided positively in the PhD process?
So that's a fantastic question. I wonder if, Sunitha, can you respond to us? Are you able to talk? Because I'd like to ask you, what are some of the positive things? Like, what are positive questions that would really help that process that you can think of?
And I've unmuted you, Sunitha, so you can ask.
She's saying she's in the library, so.
Oh, okay.
Oh, well, can you type one maybe in the chat box? Yeah, I can totally understand being in the library. They will not want you talking in there. But I'm just trying to think of, like, what are some of the positive things? Because we talked about this actually at my dinner last night, which is interesting. And they started talking about how difficult the PhD process is when they don't have that relationship with their advisor. And so one of the questions I asked them was, well, have you ever considered asking your advisor what you're doing right so you know what to do more of? right? So when you're reviewing this process, can you tell me where I am on point? What do you really like about this? Because I want to further develop that. And so I'm wondering for you, I could not think of, can I say I have the freedom to do what I want to do? I don't know. Does she have the freedom to do what she wants to do?
Maybe that's the question that she has. Does she have the freedom to work on what she wants to work on?
So I'm not sure how they would respond to that, but I do know that if you could refine that even more to really ask what it is that you're doing well, right? Because that's what we want to ask them. What am I doing well? And then I think you could say, yes, how can I expand on that? Like, is it something that I would have the freedom, to do it however I wanted? Or can you think of the way that I will excel to be my best? Because you're really just looking for the best possible outcome with the PhD instructor. And so that's part of the process is I'm asking for the best possible outcome in the situation that I'm in. So if your best possible outcome is to do anything that you want to do, then I would definitely ask that question. But when you have the answer of what your freedom is, then I want you to look at that and ask the question of what's the best possible outcome in these parameters. So does that make sense?
It's really,
yeah, I think
oh, sorry.
the underlying principle, I think, is does someone with little positional power, formal authority, shift a system so that it can start working to allow them to achieve their dreams and goals?
So I would say that they might not shift the system, but they could shift themselves. And so if you start to shift yourself to look for what you're doing well, because that's what happened last night when they were telling me the stories. I said to them, but what did you do well? What did you accomplish? Where did you excel? And once they started talking about those things, they actually shifted themselves into a very positive viewpoint and realized that there were a lot of great things happening to them at that same time, right? They were learning a lot. They were making a positive difference. They were loving what they did. And they really were just trying to get this final dissertation done so that they can move forward into those dreams. And so my recommendation in that situation would be to really shift yourself into this positive format, because that system or process isn't the one that's going to change. It's going to be you changing yourself in the process until you move out of it, because they would have to want to change and want to start using the principles to do that. But you can always shift yourself in your viewpoint. And even the questions that you're asking yourself, like, what's the best thing that could happen from this meeting? What am I looking for? Like, what's the best possible outcome? And then really focusing your energy and attention on that.
It's interesting as you were talking about this. I was thinking about two things. One is, social media marketing, right? What am I doing that people are responding to? And can I do more of that? And do I want to do more of that? Is part of it. And then the other part is, I was thinking, I'm working with an editor right now on the book I've got coming out. And it's been a really, really great, interesting experience. But I think the reason I'm enjoying the editing process is because I've been edited for years and I've gotten over the, oh my God, they're being critical, and into they're helping me write better. And every time I work with an editor, I learn something new that makes the next iteration of writing easier to do. So my whole attitude about being edited is 180 degrees different than what it was when I started writing. At first I was like, oh my goodness, they don't like this, they don't like this, I've screwed up that. And now I'm like, ooh, they're just helping me. And it's a mind shift. Nothing's changed. The process is what it is because it needs to be like this for a reason. What's changed is my attitude is more positive because I'm looking at the positives of the experience.
And both were always present. So it's really where you're focusing your energy. So what other questions do
Elizabeth,
we have?
do we have other questions?
We do. Coral Pratt says, how do you work around contributions from people with very different specialties? For example, you're talking about the vision, the design, but in one organization, you have a guy who does the packaging, and in the same organization, you have two women working on artificial intelligence. How do you bring those perspectives together?
So that's a fantastic question. And that's what's really fun about using the 4D process is the way that 1 + 1 becomes 7 when you bring everyone together. And so when we do that, we're generally working on some sort of change, right? So the organization might say, we're working on our plan for the future, and what we're going to need to do is we're going to need everybody to I don't know, work 38 hours a week instead of 40, or we need everybody to move to a different building, or we need everybody to do something. And so when we bring all of these people together to talk about the change, what happens is when you have the guy in packaging and you have the two women in artificial intelligence, they're going to be looking at it from a different viewpoint, but they're going to interview each other. They're going to talk about their needs. They're going to bring in the whole system, what the needs are of the whole system, and talk about how to get to the end together. And so the magic that happens is that the solution that's created with the whole system is something that everybody agrees that they can be part of. And so you don't have a situation where the two women who work in artificial intelligence create these solutions, and then the person that's over there in packaging says, but that doesn't work for me because XYZ, because they had a voice in the process. And so bringing them all together really allows them holistically to see how each thing impacts the whole system. And we always bring people together. Even we're planning this city summit for the city of Tampa. And in that 800-person summit, we will have a homeless person, we'll have disabled people, we'll have people from different cultures that don't speak English. We'll have CEOs of large organizations, we'll have nonprofits, we'll have the government sector, the Department of Transportation, everyone together to talk about what makes a great city. Because if we don't have all of the voices together, we really can't talk about how to connect and propel Tampa, right, to its best possible future, because it needs to collectively move everyone together. And so we do that same process in organizations, because collectively that whole organization needs to move together, because it doesn't really matter how smart or intelligent you can be in your artificial intelligence if you can't package it and get it out the door, right? And so that's what we talk to organizations about, is every single piece of the organization has value. And so bringing everyone together to talk about how to combine all of those strengths for the best possible outcome for your product is what's important.
So is this a form of design thinking, or is it above design thinking? Is it parallel to it? Is it a subset of it? How does this relate? Because you keep saying whole system, so I'm just wondering about how it relates.
Yeah, I just always call it it's really just a framework. I find that you can combine the framework with different measures that you're already doing. So I don't know that I want to say it's a subset, but it's just really, it's really that same process of thinking about how do you combine like everyone, right? That's what David always talks about, whole system. That's why I use those terms, because when I talk to David Cooperrider, he really talks about it. But it's really about hearing everybody's voice and the co-creation.
Elizabeth?
Yes. Somebody had written, I'm considering using appreciative inquiry as part of an organizational diagnosis, but I'm concerned that the positive approach may mask the discovery of the underlying issues if they're uncomfortable. Would you please comment on this? So for example, say the issue is gender discrimination. Are there unmentionables, and how does this process work with those kind of situations?
So I don't think the process would hinder that at all. You're still going to identify in your analysis, you're going to identify what it is that you want. So if your issue is gender discrimination, what is the desired outcome? Is the desired outcome equality? Is the desired outcome that that you need inclusion? So the difference between doing the diagnosis and writing it up with appreciative inquiry is you're still going to identify the problem, because the problem is going to be that something's happening that's not giving you that inclusion. The only difference between writing it up is, instead of focusing all of your energy on this is the discrimination or these are the pockets of areas, you're going to be writing up your final analysis, if you use this approach, to say, this is how we get inclusion for everybody. This is how we have an equitable voice for everybody in the organization. And this is the framework or the process that we're going to need to follow to get the desired outcome. So you're definitely going to need to identify the problems in your analysis, and that's going to help you look at what the desired solutions are going to be. It's just with appreciative inquiry, instead of asking the question, how do I fix that problem? You're going to reframe that to, what's the best possible outcome? Because you may find that the problem initially is discrimination with one small group, but really the best possible outcome is to redesign the processes in the organization to make sure that everybody has an equitable voice across the board. And it might be more than just that one issue that you found. And so that would be the difference in the appreciative approach, is you're really looking for the best possible outcome. But people ask all the time, do you mask problems? Do you ignore problems? And the answer is no. You still identify problems. You still look at what's not working. It's just that instead of only focusing your energy to fix that, you reframe it. Kind of like when you hear people talk about, if you get your child's report card, right? And your child has, 4 A's, a B, and an F. If you focus all of your energy on the F, you're really not focusing on the strengths and what they're doing well to get the 4 A's and the B. And so with appreciative inquiry, the F would come into play, right? We would look at the report card and we would say, what are you doing well? How are you getting these A's? What strengths are you using? And then I would ask, how do you apply those same strengths to this class that you're getting an F in so that you can do better? But I would just reframe it to say, I want to use your strengths, right? Because your overall objective is to have all A's and B's, or whatever it is that you're working with the child on.
That's a great example. One thing I wonder though is, what if people don't start off with the diagnosis of gender discrimination? A lot of times people misdiagnose the issue, right? And so they look at it as a productivity problem or a teamwork problem. And so they, kind of start off on a more superficial plane than getting to the heart of the matter.
So I don't know that that's an appreciative inquiry question. That would just be part of the whatever you're using to diagnose the issues. In learning and development, we would ask somebody, like when we started doing it, what does success look like, right? So you're going to tell me what the problem is, and I'm going to try to determine what success looks like and continue to drill down to why you're not having it. And so if it's a productivity issue and I ask what success looks like and I'm working on the productivity issue, appreciative inquiry isn't going to help me get to that as a framework necessarily, because I'm going to ask for the best possible outcome. But if you tell me that productivity is the issue, the best possible outcome is going to be that I have higher productivity. Through the interviewing process of asking each employee the best possible outcome, hopefully that would bring up the overall issue. But that is something that you're going to want to use several tools in the process of looking for the best possible outcome to make sure that you drill all the way down.
Okay, thank you. And I know you had given us a list of resources, and I'll post those in the chat room now. So is that kind of the tools that you're talking about?
The resources that I gave you were more on appreciative inquiry. So I put Diana Whitney's book there on the power of appreciative inquiry, how Hunter Douglas used it to really change. But the power of appreciative inquiry is really about hearing people's stories, connecting people together, getting people to have this generative, positive process, and to really create the systems in your organization that allow people to be heard. And that's the biggest value that I see of appreciative inquiry is it really hears every voice and it takes them into consideration moving forward.
You know,
And it,
as
go
I'm
ahead.
listening to you, one of the things I'm hearing as the strength of this is not just that you're asking people to focus on what a good desired outcome would be, but also the importance of listening to everybody in the system. I think a lot of times when design work and organizational, how are we going to organize ourselves is done, it takes the upper management and the managers and the people actually doing the work are not consulted in the design process of what's going on. And what you're saying is if you don't include everyone, it's not, there's an inherent flaw in not talking to everyone. So can you address that a little bit?
So, and I have a great example of that. So Ken Blanchard, it's probably like 25 years ago, but Ken Blanchard wrote the 1 Minute Manager. And he was doing a talk at an ATD conference. And what he said was he had gone into a company and they had called him about a productivity issue. So they were having very low productivity in a manufacturing environment. And so he said, well, can I go down and talk to the employees in the environment and see more about what's happening? And they said, you can. I don't know what information you're going to get from doing that, but go ahead. And so he went down to the manufacturing plant and he spent a day there and he interviewed some people. And at about 2:00, sure enough, everybody sat down and they stopped working. And so he sat down with them and said, why are you guys sitting here? And they said, we're going to pass out. It's too hot. It's really, really hot. And so he went back up the hill, to the executives and he said, it's really hot in the warehouse. You need to install an air system. You're going to have to put an air conditioner in there if you want people to work because they'd get sick in the afternoon. And so he said, and this is 25 years ago. He's like, they paid me $10,000. They installed the air conditioning system and everybody was happy. But it's really about truly asking people. And it's all about the speed of trust then, right? Because the executives couldn't walk into the warehouse and ask them unless the people had enough trust in them to be able to answer the question. With appreciative inquiry, it's individuals interviewing individuals. So it's two people talking in an interview and then coming together to kind of bring out the themes and the stories. And so it makes it a little safer. And but it really is about making sure that you hear all the voices, because a lot of times people know and they just don't speak up. And so it allows you to learn a lot more, and it allows people to be invested. Also, there's a lot of situations with employees where they might have these other talents that you don't know anything about. But when you start saying, how can you be part of this solution? I worked with a group of managers, and it was just 3 people, and we kind of quickly went through the 4D process. And when I asked them, what would success look like? If you were creating the success for this, what would you do? They redesigned the whole structure of how they managed people. And because they did it, they were super excited, right, to put it into place. And then they went out with their employees and allowed their employees to redesign it. And they increased their productivity by about 220%. Because they were able to do the things that they were really good at and shift the things that they weren't really good at to somebody who enjoyed doing it. So it has an amazing potential just to ask people questions and to really look at what their input is. But if you don't have the whole system, then you're really not able to give good feedback as to why or why not, right? That really fits into the process.
So listening is important. You can't just ask questions, you have to listen. Real quick, for everybody participating, if you want an HRCI, a SHRM, or a general certificate, you can have all 3 or 1 or whatever. We need your name as you want it on the certificate, your email, and which certificates you want. Again, my company, Humanist Learning System, has gotten these pre-approved through HRCI and SHRM. This is approved for an HRCI business credit, by the way. So go ahead and put that in the chat room, and then afterwards I'll be getting those certificates of completion out to everybody who has requested one. So Sherri, I had just said something about listening and then didn't listen. So can you talk a little bit about, I think, how we as individuals can improve our listening? Because I assume that's also, I would just assume that would help increase trust and make the process easier. So if you can address that a little bit.
So the best way to improve your listening is to be curious about what the other person is saying. And so it's really just about the curiosity of waiting and to allow a pause. So if I want to have the best possible listening, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to be curious about what your answer is. And then I'm going to pause after you finish speaking before I start speaking again. And that pause is key for me, because if not, a lot of times while you're talking, I'm formulating my answer. And so if I'm thinking about what I'm going to say while you're talking, I'm not truly giving you my attention or listening. So the best tool that I could give you for listening is to be curious. If you're really curious about what the other person's going to say, then you're going to be listening to hear what that is. If you're anticipating that you already know what they're going to say, or you're more worried about what you're going to say in response to them, then you're probably not truly listening. Or listening as well as you can.
It's really interesting. I went to school in Hawaii, at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And I grew up in Los Angeles, and my boyfriend always told me I talked quickly. And my mom speaks quicker than me because she grew up in Philadelphia. And different parts of the country signal comprehension differently. Like in Eastern US, you tend to I got a degree in linguistics, so forgive me on this, but the overtalk can be a signal of understanding. If I can complete your sentence in some places, it means I'm listening and on the same page. In Hawaii, the way you show that you're listening is precisely to listen to what the person's saying. You then need to visibly show that you are digesting what they just said. Then, only then can you formulate a response. And after having formulated a response, now you can speak. So it's not just a pause at the end, it's 2 or 3 pauses for all this stuff to happen. And if you speak like I do, you're considered a bit rude because you're not listening. They don't hear you listening, because the culture is to absorb before you even consider your response. So I love that. I'm not good at it, but I love it.
So in saying that, though, culturally, if you're in a culture where good listening skills are being able to respond to somebody else's sentence, then I would say in that culture, that would be the best way to listen, right? Because if you're able to do that, I wouldn't be able to do that, but I might be able to do that if I grew up in that culture, because then everybody would have been doing it, right? Then I would be trained at it. So I think that's a good point in just really valuing the culture that you're in and the person that you're speaking with.
Yeah, my husband does it very well. I'm not so much. Elizabeth, do we have other questions? I know people are putting their requests for certificates in there. We have about 5 more minutes. So if there's any questions in the chat room, let's ask them. Otherwise, I have a couple more, or if you have a couple, Elizabeth, that's good.
Carol Pratt just typed one in. It says, thank you for this. I still have many questions. The most important one deals with what type of work is required before you start appreciative inquiry, because I love the equal voice premise, but then there are some people in the organization that expect that their voice is going to be the same quality, and it is not so. Many times women back down from their ideas because some men just expect that their voice is the solution. So could you speak to that?
So I love that. And we're actually dealing with that right now in the project that we're doing for the city of Tampa. And the reason is because culturally, some people are not going to speak up unless asked, right? We have a lot of different cultures, and so we want to make sure. But how the appreciative inquiry process works is the most important part is the question. So if I'm using the 4D cycle, I will come up with questions, and I'm going to ask you a high point moment. Tell me about a time when you were thriving and you were alive. I'm going to ask you a question about what's working, what's the best of what is right now. And then I'm going to ask you a future question. How do you, if you had a magic wand, it's 5 years from now, how would you make things the way that you think the most desired future would be? And so those questions are going to be individually asked. Two people are going to partner up in an interview and they're going to ask the questions. And then from there, you're going to build on themes. So each person is just interviewing one person and getting the answers. How we prep for that is we find out who's going to be in the room. And then if you're only going to be able to bring a third of your workforce to be part of this conversation, we go out and individually interview the people who are not part of the process to bring their voices in the room. But all of the voices are brought in on these one-on-one interviews. And so every voice is able to be heard because they have this one-to-one interview. It's not one person speaking up in a group or even one person having to kind of combat. We tell people, you ask the interview questions and write down the answers, then you switch. The other person asks you, and then we actually record on a summary sheet what those answers are. So that's the part where I say it's a little difficult to explain sometimes if you don't experience it, only because you can understand how voices would be left out, but the process itself really incorporates all those voices and brings them forward. And there's a great study, I'll have to see if I can find it and they can send it out, with the US Navy, where they brought, the 5-star generals and the first class seamen together, and they were concerned about how that would work in the process. And they had wonderful outcomes from that because they were really just able to bring all of the voices forward. Does that answer that question?
I think so. I think she's worried about it coming to the lowest denominator of consensus versus a truly generative outcome, and then also maybe balancing power dynamics that the people with the most senior authority. So you're saying the process somehow sorts that out.
The process does, and it's the way the process works, because you do the interview questions, then you bring people together in larger groups and they discuss the themes, right? And then you put up the themes and we do something called walking with your feet, and you really actually physically stand up and walk to the area of interest that you have. And then you're led through a process of coming up with a prototype and doing an aspiration statement about that topic. And so as you're going through the process, everybody is really neutralized from a power perspective, and we're really talking about the themes and the issues of what's possible. So the process itself really equalizes the playing field there, and everybody has an equal voice in the room.
So we're not just talking about the questions that are asked, as you said at the beginning, that this process itself is designed in such a way that everyone is humanized and equalized in the discussion. And that's what you
Yes.
can't explain, you have to experience.
Yeah, it's easier. Once I experienced it, I really got it. I loved the idea of it, and I loved reading about it. But one of the things I said before I took on this Tampa summit is I really have to experience an 800-person summit. I don't understand how you put 800 people in a room and everybody has a voice. That doesn't make sense to me. Like, I've read about it, I've studied it, but I just don't totally understand it. And then when I got there, we went through the exact same process. We sat down, we interviewed, we brought the interviews up, we brought the themes up, and everybody had a voice from all of these different countries. There's like 26 countries there, and it works. So that's the framework of the 4D process. When you're using Appreciative Prior yourself, it's really just about focusing on reframing problems to opportunities and looking for the best of what is. So, but the framework itself does. It equalizes the playing field, it gets all of the ideas there, and it brings it forward with co-creation.
That is awesome. Okay, so we're at the end of our hour. I want to thank Sherri for joining us. And just remind everybody, this was a program from the International Humanistic Management Association. We are an association. Everyone's free to join. If you are not on our newsletter, please go to our website and sign up, or you might have already signed up when you registered for this. Anybody who wants to volunteer, we're open. We need help with things. And we have a PhD network. We have necessary conversations. In fact, we have Vincent from Patagonia coming on in May, is it May, Elizabeth, for the necessary conversation? We also have Raj Sasota coming up. For the professionals conversation next month, we have Kristen Sherri from UMAP coming on about how to onboard people with dignity. So if you're not already signed up for that, please do. It's already on our event list. Sherri, thank you so much for joining us. We've really appreciated that.